So we're going to be looking at how to write your essay. And the very first thing that we can think about is what the experiment actually was. So if you want to, you can go to scitoolkit.org, and then I suggest that you go and have a look at the library of experiments. And in here, we're going to find the experiment that we actually did as a class together. Click on Try Them All, and you'll notice that there's a whole bunch of tasks. You can go through if you'd like and find ones that you're interested in. The only one that we're actually using in this particular class is the multitasking test. So click on that. This brings up a description of the task and possibly some horrible memories of what happened when you actually did the task yourselves. And it gives a description of what you can expect. So, what I suggest that you do is look through it. If you've forgotten all about the task, then this will be a very useful reminder. The other thing that is useful here is the actual description of the output file, which might be good to have a look at. And if you want to, in fact, I suggest that you do this, have a look at the paper by Stewart, O'Connor, Connor, and Laws in 2013, Are Women Better Than Men at Multitasking? So you can click there and it brings the paper up. This is a useful paper because it is actually the paper on which we're basing the hypotheses. The hypotheses being that actually women will be better than men at multitasking. So you should definitely find this paper and put it in as one of the papers that you cite in your research paper. Okay, so download this one, make sure that you cite it. In terms of how you should actually write your paper, I've uploaded an APA-style template on the essay assignment page, and you can find it. If you click the little arrow, it'll open up in another window, and you can actually have a look at it. You should put your title in here, try and make it interesting, put your name and your student number in here, and then just put in York under the institution. You shouldn't really have an author note, but you might want to have your email and corresponding address, etc. Your abstract should be short. It is a brief overview of what happened, what you found in the experiment, the reason for the experiment, in fact. So you actually want to sort of give a sentence or two explaining why you did the study, another sentence or two stating what you found, and finally, why we care. All of that is basically a reason for why people should read your paper. So this is, if nothing else, this is what people will read about your paper. So make sure that it's interesting, it's punchy, and that it's to the point. Keywords are things like multitasking, gender, reaction times, things that tell you about what the article is about. So you can put that in there. Here, you're going to put the introduction. The introduction in your paper should be about 1 or 2 pages. In the introduction, the purpose is to introduce the topic. The topic, in your case, is going to be multitasking, and it's also going to be the effects of gender on cognition. I suggest that you use 1 paragraph to introduce the general topic of multitasking and cognition, what this has, what effect this has, how it's been measured, etc. You might need to look up 1 or 2 resources in order to do this, and then use at least 1 other paragraph to discuss the effects of gender. And at this point, you could discuss this paper by Stewart et al. You should clearly state the hypothesis of your paper, which is that we expect that we're going to replicate the effect by Stewart et al., that women will be more successful at multitasking than men. It's a little bit debatable about whether you should put the hypothesis at the beginning of your introduction or at the very end. I think it helps to set things out if you set the introduction or the hypothesis at the beginning of the introduction. It sort of helps to frame everything else that you do. So in this case, if I was going to do it, I would say, okay, where is the comment section there? I might say something like hypothesis, and then introduction to multitasking, and finally the effects of gender on cognition. Alternatively, you could move the hypothesis to the end after you've introduced these two things here. As long as there is a logical flow between all of these things, that is good. You shouldn't have sentences or paragraphs that just float in space. And what do I mean by that? I mean that each of your sentences and your paragraphs should be connected to the previous one. There should be a logic to your argument. So if you start talking about gender, then you need a linking statement from the one paragraph to the other paragraph, so that your author doesn't have, or your reader doesn't have to make a conceptual leap. All right, so what is this? This is all of the different headings that we can have here. We'll get back to that. The next thing that we want to do is we want to discuss your methods. In your methods section, you're going to have to state essentially what you did, and we're going to talk about what we did online in particular. And you're going to describe the methods for the online task. And that would be something like students were asked to go to SciToolkit. They were asked to participate in an online experiment, and it was a study designed by Stowett et al. And these were an example of the type of stimuli that they saw. After this, you might want to describe participants. And actually, that wouldn't be a separate heading, that would be a subheading. You can put in a description of the participants here. You can say, how many men there were, how many women there were, etc. The next thing that you can do is, after reporting the methods section, you want to report the results. The results section is going to include any statistics that you ran. So let me just put that in, descriptive statistics. And this would be potentially in the table. It will also include the inferential statistics. And this would be your t-tests. And it will finally include your graphs. So in our case, probably bar charts would be ideal for showing the results of the t-tests. Don't do any interpretation in the results section, just present the results. Finally, once you've included the results section, you're going to include a discussion. In your discussion section, you're going to, first of all, state what you found, or restate what you found briefly. Then, you're going to state whether or not the hypothesis was confirmed. It's okay to not have a hypothesis be confirmed. In fact, that's better science. If you actually state that your hypothesis was X and you didn't confirm it, or your hypothesis was Y and you did confirm it. There's a misconception in a lot of literature that you must find the hypothesis that you generated, and that is not the case. That's not definitely not the case. Okay. What else does your discussion need to do? Well, aside from restating what you briefly found and stating whether or not the hypothesis was confirmed, you need to discuss how your findings, or how the current findings, fit with the literature. You may recall that you've already looked at some of the literature and you will have discussed some of the literature in your introduction. So your introduction is up here. We don't actually put the title introduction, but this is pretty much this point up here. So this is all your introduction. So in the introduction, you've discussed 2 or 3 papers. In fact, let's say 3 papers for the sake of the argument. You're going to add 3 papers, including this, so find an additional 2 papers, probably 1 on multitasking and 1 on gender effects would be sufficient. Those papers are what you're going to use in your discussion. So you're going to discuss how the findings, the current findings, fit with the 3 papers that you have found. Basically, what you want to discuss is you want to discuss whether or not your findings agree with the previous literature, whether they show things that are similar to what you show, or whether your findings are discrepant. You should also attempt to explain why you think that your findings are different, if they are, what might be limitations of the current paper, and how the paper could be improved in the future. One thing that you may wish to discuss is the fact that we have a very small sample size, and this could be perceived as a limitation. This is the point of the paper. The discussion is where you basically get to give people the take-home message of the entire paper, so make sure that it's written well. APA-styled citations. So if you're going to cite something in APA style, you need to use probably Google Scholar as the best source. So how would we cite this paper, for example? How are women better than men at multitasking? Well, let's copy this title and head over to Google Scholar. Once we're in Google Scholar, you can type in that title and you'll note that it comes up. It's the very first hit. If you hit the little quotation marks there, it's going to bring up an APA format citation, and you can select that and copy it. If you then head back over to your paper, if I could find it, you can then paste it in the works cited or the references section. Note that everything should be in Times New Roman and size 12. This is a perfectly formatted citation for APA style. Make sure that your citations are in alphabetical order, and otherwise that's pretty well it. That's perfect. So I've given you the first citation. You just need to find 2 others. But how do you cite this in text? Well, it's pretty easy. Just copy that, and let's assume that we want to discuss that somewhere in the introduction. I'm going to create a new comment so that I have the citation in front of me, and then I can see that it's by Stowett, O'Connor, Connor, and Laws, 2013. So I might say something like, the paper by Stowett, O'Connor, Connor, plus Laws, 2013, was particularly relevant. ... That's one way of citing it. Another way you could do it without directly referencing the authors. So here I'm referring to the authors, and then I'm just putting the citation year in brackets. The other way that you can do it is to actually cite something after you've just stated a fact. So women are better at multitasking than men. And that's a little bit contentious, so maybe I would alter that and say, some studies show that women are better at multitasking than men. And then you could say, in brackets, Stowett, O'Connor, Connor, plus Law, comma, 2013. And that is an equally valid way of citing something in APA style. I suggest if you want to cite more than one article at a time, then you could look that up, but briefly you would separate the citations by a semicolon and put them in alphabetical order. Okay, so that's pretty much it for how to write a paper in APA style. Make sure that you have all of the elements, that you have your title page, you have an abstract, keywords, that you have an introduction that's at least 2 pages, that includes the literature. You're basically going to be setting out the reason for why you want to conduct this research. There's been previous research that suggests that there is an effective gender in multitasking, and we wanted to confirm it using an online paradigm. The methods, you're going to discuss what we did, describing what we did using the SciToolkit experiment, and it's going to be extremely helpful for you guys to actually look at the multitasking site here from SciToolkit and go through and read about the methods. You'll also want to read this paper by Stewart very carefully because we essentially use their methods. What else? Once you've done the methods section, and that should be probably a paragraph or 2, describe the participants. Remember how we can get descriptive statistics in JASP. So you might want to describe how many men and how many women we have in the sample. You might want to describe the fact that these were all undergraduate students that we had, and that everybody was doing an online task. In your results section, you want to include all of your results, so all of your descriptive statistics, all of your inferential statistics, your t-tests, and you want to include your charts. If you just paste the output from JASP, you are not doing enough. You need to actually set it up and incorporate your results so that they flow in text. That would be the best way to do it. So if you say something like, men appeared to have slower reaction times than women, then you could actually, that would be better. So you could say M equals, I don't know, I'm making these numbers up so don't actually use them, comma, SD equals 500. That would be a very slow reaction time. SD equals 500, and we would want to include the unit of measure. These would be milliseconds, and that would also be milliseconds. Appear to have slower reaction times than women. And then would be M equals 1,200 or 1,100, comma SD equals 450. Okay. This is just an example. This is contextualized. These are statistics that are also contextualized by text, meaning that it's not just a bunch of numbers, and it's actually interpretable by people who are maybe not as literate in statistics. Essentially, what you're doing with this is you're using statistics just like you're using references to back up the statements that you're making. So I'm talking about men, and then I provide some descriptive statistics about the men, and then I'm talking about women, and I'm providing some descriptive statistics about them. If I wanted to back this up even further, I would include a t statistic. So I would maybe say something like t, and then the degrees of freedom, and then I would give the t statistic, whatever that was. Maybe it was 4.0 equals equals 4.0, comma, and then you would want to give the probability value, that's the p-value that's associated with it, equals 0.03. Again, I'm making these numbers up, comma, and you would want to give the Cohen's d value, which is, again, the effect size. And it's the effect size that's measured in standard deviation units. You would then want to interpret that. I've just said you don't want to interpret it in the results. Let me just make a note of it. This is example t-test output. Don't use these numbers. save interpretation for the discussion. Okay. Make sure that you frame it in a way that the statistics appears within the flow of the text so that people can understand what you're talking about, and it's not just a bunch of tables that you've just thrown into the results section. Okay, and then finally, the last section that you have is your discussion, where you're actually discussing the results, you're unpacking them for the reader. Do the results fit with what you predicted? Yes or no? Do the results fit with what previous people have shown? Yes or no? Are there ways that the study could have been improved? Well, obviously, tell us what they are. And then just make sure that you have all of your references and that all of your references match up with what you've actually said in text. If you do all of that, then you're going to have a wonderful paper. Okay. Oh yes, in APA style, the other thing that you have to remember is that the tables and the figures do not go in text. That is, that you're not going to actually put your figures and your tables directly here. You're just going to refer to them. So you would say something like, see table 1. And table 1 would actually be in the table section of the paper. You might also say see figure 1. And figure 1 will be at the very back here. Make sure that your figures have appropriate axes and that they're interpretable. Make sure that they have a title that is sensible. And make sure that you actually have a caption that describes everything that's going on in this figure. Very often what people do when they're trying to interpret a paper on its own is they read the abstract, and then once they've read the title and the abstract, they skip to the very, very back where they find the figures, and they try and read the figures. They try and interpret what's going on in the figure, they read the caption, they look at the numbers, and then from that they just make up their own minds about whether or not they believe the data. Then, if they want to, then they go back and they read through the paper in detail. So, in my opinion, the most important parts of the paper are actually the abstract and the figures. Okay, so we've been over that. Now let's have a look at how you're going to actually analyze the data, briefly. We will continue that in another video. So let me just